The 2024 NFL Combine has come and gone, and with it, we've had phenomenal performances like Xavier Worthy's 4.2140, as well as all kinds of other outrageous athletic performances, plus quarterback interviews and all the drama that you've come to know from a weekend in Indianapolis. We're going to talk through it all on this episode of Bear With Us. What's going on, everybody, and welcome back to Bear With Us. My name is Robert Schmitz, editor-in-chief of the Bears blog, right here with my co-host, Nick Whalen of Football Guys. And Nick, no time like the Combine, right? I love this time of year. This is like draft Christmas season where the peppermint mochas come out, except now it's prospects wearing compression shorts, running time, like getting us our spider charts. This is great, man.
Yeah, it's kinda like, whenever you decide to put up the Christmas tree, and then you're
hmm
like, "Oh, you know
hmm
what? I'm gonna turn on some holiday music," and you, like, start that.
It's
Yeah,
when Mariah
this is the
Carey
time of year.
starts to unfreeze, right?
You you
Except it's for football.
you know, speaking of, this'll be a fun reference for Bears fans. So, my sister was a big Danny Warfel fan. Remember when he had that
Okay.
small stint? He actually had a Christmas Carol album out, so we joked and bought one, and we would play Danny Warfel singing Christmas Carol songs, kinda getting ready for the season. So yeah, man. So that kind of that's what it reminds me of, you know. But I mean, it's we talked about this, like the combine isn't everything, but there's some things
No,
that you learn a ton of, which is really good information.
absolutely. You get great information. I mean, whether it's guys answering questions at their media pressers or whether it's guys confirming everything that you saw on tape. I mean, gosh, there's no more interesting story when it comes to numbers, tape, and what we saw on the combine field than Florida State wide receiver Keon Coleman. But Nick, I got to ask you, okay? Am I allowed to just jump straight into talking about the prospects that you and I thought performed really well at the combine? Or do we have to talk about the quarterback drama first?
You know, it would be fun to talk about other prospects for once. I'm sure maybe even our listeners would be open to that.
I mean, okay, so in that case, because I'm here for it, we can put a
Yeah,
pin in the quarterback stuff. Look,
yeah.
obviously,
That's the Jalen Johnson this week.
It
Remember
is.
last week?
But we're not going to push it until the 40-minute mark. Bears
Right.
fans, if you're enjoying the podcast, by the way, if you like the podcast in general, do us a favor, give us a review on Spotify, give us a review on Apple Podcasts. We're at like 80 reviews on Spotify and I think 60 reviews on Apple Podcasts. We'll take whatever feedback we can get, though we would appreciate a 5-star. DM me and Nick on Twitter or just email us about what you're liking about the show. We want to make this the best Bears podcast we possibly can for you. And within that, that means that eventually we will need to talk about Caleb Williams not doing medicals, not the first prospect to not do medicals.
No.
Unlike what some people are saying on Twitter. Plus, Jaden Daniels not working out of the combine. Guys like Drake May. I got to tell you, Nick, I know I'm going rapid fire here. Drake May saying, I wouldn't want a game plan for me. Awesome.
Yeah.
Love that kind of an
Yeah.
answer.
Yeah.
I don't
It was a
care
good
how
response.
don't care how cookie cutter it is. Every time I see that, I'm like, that guy gets it. JJ
Mhm.
McCarthy had himself a wonderful week of being just the darling of NFL
Yeah.
media. But man, Nick, I don't think that there was any name that popped off the compression short field quite to me like Texas wide receiver Adonai Mitchell. And he
Oh,
doesn't want to be called AD anymore. But the
no.
fact that a guy his size, I'm scrolling through the list that you made for me because
Yep.
there he is, 6'2", 205, runs a 4.3440. This matches what I saw on tape. I have multiple notes about him having burst, especially getting down the field. But man, Nick, you're talking about a guy right now that's projected anywhere from 20 to 40-ish. This seems like the kind of guy to me. I'm just going to say it now before it shocks anybody. If you told me by draft day, he has risen into a consensus wide receiver 4 spot, and it's expected that he's drafted somewhere between 9 and 13. That would not surprise me, and he would look awfully nice next to DJ Moore, wouldn't he?
Yeah, and honestly, that's where I kind of have him right now. If you to kind of compare his game to people that haven't watched him play, he's a very smooth player. He reminds me a little bit of like maybe a lesser version of like a CD Lamb, because CD Lamb is very smooth on the field to like a T Higgins. He's kind of in that range, and we're going to talk about a lot of numbers, y'all, and we're going to talk about RAS. Okay, RAS. Raz is relative athletic score. I think I talked about it last week, but that's something we're going to reference. So 80 Mitchell, it's out of 10. and this is in reference to, I think, as long as he's had the stats of the combine. So I think it's since like, I don't know, 2000 or 1990, whatever, it doesn't matter. AD Mitchell is 9.98 out of 10. Like, knocked out of the park. He had a, besides the 4.3, 440, which is ridiculous at 6'2", he had 11.4 broad jump. He had a 39.5 vertical. Like, this guy can play. So it wasn't just him though, Robert. We have a
Well,
ton, a ton of receivers, and really they tested out so well, which I thought they would, but they tested, I think, maybe a little bit better. Enough receivers tested out well where it makes me wonder of like, hey, do we stay at 9? Do we trade back and just get a bunch of receivers? Because I think between about pick 15 and pick 60, there's going to be like 10 receivers off the board because these
so
guys crushed it.
So it's funny, right? Because you mentioned a lesser version of CD Lamb, Nick. I want to take a risk for a moment because at least when I was watching his tape, there was this part where I remember I watched him and went, "Ah, that gummit," and it was like, "Why, Robert?" Talking to myself because that's what I do when I'm watching tape with like techno music is like it's like a lo-fi techno blaring. It's like 1 a.m. in the morning, and you just enter this lucid state where you're having conversations with yourself about draft picks, right? And I'm looking for an X receiver. I want an X receiver really badly if I can get one. And it dawns on me that this guy's a big slot. AD Mitchell. He can play on the outside,
Oh,
but
he
he's
can, yeah.
very natural at that big slot position. Just like a guy playing in Minnesota right now, looking for the biggest contract in football. And it's funny because when you look at the measurables, well, AD Mitchell, sitting at just over 6'2", is 1 inch taller, but darn near Justin Jefferson. At 205, he weighs right near Justin Jefferson's 202. Justin Jefferson had a speedy 40-yard dash of 4.43, which AD Mitchell ran faster than. And Justin Jefferson jumped really well with a broad jump of 10.5 feet, which AD Mitchell outdid with an 11.04
Wow.
broad jump. And Justin Jefferson had a hell of a vertical jump too at 37.5 inches, which AD Mitchell jumped farther than with a 39.5 inch vertical. Look,
Hmm.
man, I am trying to talk about the same thing that I should have been louder about with Darnell Wright last year, which is to say, just because we missed this guy earlier in the draft, like the draft cycle, doesn't mean that he's a second rounder that's now a late first.
Right.
I would
Right.
not be shocked if this guy is higher on some people's boards than Brian Thomas Jr. right now. And we probably ought to start talking about him that way because I'll tell you what, if he's your fourth wide receiver on the board, and he doesn't have to be, but if he is, and
Yeah,
he
he
becomes
is.
a target either at 9 or in a trade down, I am very seriously interested, trying not to let the cart go before the horse in the hype train. I really do believe that this combine, if I have one more takeaway for you, Nick, I'm hitting you with a lot. I just relatively compared athletically,
Mhm.
Justin Jefferson to AD Mitchell. But I also tend to think that with Dallas Turner jumping out of the gym and Joe Alt looking like the mountain from Game of
Oh
Thrones
my gosh,
and
yeah.
all kinds of other offensive tackles, by the way, having themselves fabulous, fabulous days out there, plus the fact that all three receivers, or at least all the ones that ran, looked really, really good, I would be pretty surprised if Roma Dunze doesn't get either to 7, 8. I mean, 7's pretty obvious, but I bet you he gets to 9. I really do. Either that or
I don't
Neighbors does. Because
I don't know. I don't know. I mean, that's a lot. Let's stick with the prospects because there's a lot of scenarios we can get to.
I'm more just to finish that. It's like, Nick, it's easy for us to go, oh, I don't know, those wide receivers are really good. But we got to think like these coaches. Atlanta taking defensive end is not out of the question,
Oh
right?
no, it's a
And
question.
then the Chargers taking a tackle is not out of the question. And the Giants taking also a tackle, not out of the question. Like, we want to peg the wide receiver to every single team that might maybe take a wide receiver, but that's not what the league has done in the past. And I don't have the data in front of me, but to suggest that three wide receivers are going to go in the top 7 picks alongside 3 quarterbacks, to say, Nick, that 3 of the first 5 position players to get drafted are all going to be wide receivers, it's possible. But this is one of those moments where we've got to say the league has not done this in the past. So to say that they will, it's just a much wilder thing to suggest than meets the eye, right?
No, I get it. I mean, the only time I can remember receivers going high multiple was the Julio Jones, AJ Green draft. They're both just studs. I just think
Kevin White,
these three
Amari
are
Cooper, legend Kevin White.
right. I mean, oh man, I just think that these three are really good. So speaking of Roma Dunze,
Ugh,
six, 6'2", 212,
dog.
9.91 RAS. So again, out of 10, like right there, 4.45, 40, 39 vertical, and continued testing, y'all, to try to improve his three-cone drill. Like, as the night was like waning, nobody was there because he just wanted to beat it. Like his interviews I thought were awesome. I thought um he said one of his favorite players growing up was Devin Hester. Like he really I think I'm moving towards I really want Roa Dunze. Maybe even over neighbors, just because I think it fits better with DJ Moore.
It's such a funny conversation, right? Because Malik Neighbors' film is unbelievable. I mean, not only is he playing in the SEC, which, look, I'm a Big 12 guy by nature, so it pains me to say this, but yeah, the SEC is that good. And it breaks my heart every time I watch it on draft film because they are all that in a bag of
Yep.
chips.
Yep.
And this is a great moment to have this conversation, right? Because I hate to burn him. Chase Daniel is out here on TV saying, I've watched every snap of Michael Penix and I didn't have him in the top 5, but now that I've seen him throw in shorts, I think I'm going to have to bump him into that. No, 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 no. That is the wrong way to handle the combine. Maybe the right way to handle the combine, Nick, is to say, Malik Neighbors is still my personal Roberts wide receiver too, but the impression it makes on me when Roma Dunze, wide receiver 3 or not, it not only comes to the combine, not only actually bothers to do his media availability, which Marvin, what are we doing? That was weird to me.
Marvin had a medical check, I think, during his.
That's what they're telling us because
Yeah.
that seems weird to me, man. Not that I'm
Yeah,
trying
I
to
get it.
burn Marvin Harrison. I don't care at the end of the day. I'm not expecting wide receivers to be like vocal, humble team leaders. We're past that at this stage of the NFL, right? But it's
Mhm.
more to say, Nick, that like you're talking about, the talent difference that you see on tape, who cares when you get that kind of hungry attitude? Because at the end of the day, this is very similar to trying to pick out recruits for a recruiting class, right? If you got the 5-star recruit, that is good. But if he never gets better than he was as an 18-year-old freshman, you have a pretty major issue. Whereas in
Yeah.
the NFL, if Roma Dunze takes a next step because he actually cares, like he gets that first NFL paycheck and he spends it on a trainer and he spends it on a chef to make sure that he's got all his like diet straight and he spends it on a nutritionist to plan that what that chef is doing. All those things that go the extra mile. This is how you see guys take that big leap forward between their freshman or their rookie and their second year. It does make a difference when the
Oh
guy's
yeah.
got character like that.
Well, I mean, because at this point, as we saw, I mean, there are so many receivers that are talented that have the athleticism. Like if we're talking about like a Brian Thomas, right? Brian Thomas, I mean, he had a 997 RAS, 6'2", 209, ran a 4.33, like crushed it.
Yeah,
He just
major
seems
freak. He's a
he
freak.
he is, but he seems more athlete-y to me, his
I
tape
agree with you.
and there than he seems as a receiver, which Odunze is more, I think, receiver that is a good athlete. If that makes a difference. Like to me,
Would you,
I'm gonna lean receiver more than athlete.
Nick, would you like to guess the percentage of Jaden Daniels' 2023 season yards that came on screens, hitches, and goes?
Are the goes including slot fades?
Yes.
Oh, the percentage?
The percentage of his yards, his total yards that came on just those 3 routes.
62%.
Okay, it's 49%, but it's still an insane
It
fraction.
is.
But
It is.
you can flip it and say that means that Brian Thomas was running an offense that was 49%
As a
hitches.
coach and like designing the passing game, the amount of times we're going to throw a screen, a hitch, or a go is very minimal.
Right. And at the NFL level, there are just a lot more routes that involve breaking and technique and fluidity and not and selling things. I mean, to use a silly example, there's a kid at a Texas A&M. His name is Anais Smith. And one of the things that I remember noticing about his tape in particular is that he's got some of the cleanest route stems in the class. That is to say, everybody, that when he is running a dig, so 10 yards forward and then hard cut to the inside, or when he's running a deep out, or when he's running a corner, or when he's running a go, or when he's running a post, Nick, they all look the same off the
Mhm.
stem. When Adonai Mitchell is running a go, you know, because he takes off the line and he is out of there. When he's running a dig, he can't hit full speed because you can't hit that kind of speed at that kind of size and ever break inside without a really
Mhm.
round break. You see guys have to throttle themselves. It's why it's so rare when a guy like Tyreek Hill can seemingly run full speed at an insane speed nearly all the time. But it's more to say that
Well,
all that
well,
route technique matters. And it's something that I personally don't feel like Brian Thomas has. I wish he did. I'd love him a lot more if he did, but he
mhm.
seems much more raw than a lot of the other guys in his
Well,
draft area.
well, I think one of the most important things that people miss out on is the ability to decelerate is almost more important than your speed as a receiver. Think of like as a pitcher, how you can change up your velocity, but the pitches look the same. It's the same thing with route running. Being able to stop on a dime or to change direction is your ability to decelerate out of your acceleration in your route stem. And so some guys can do that well. So like continuing on, there's a bunch of receivers here. One I think that does that stuff really well, really well is Lad McConkey out of Georgia. I mean, he measured in. It was interesting. Daniel Jeremiah actually compared his athleticism and size to Garrett Wilson, and you look and you're like, actually, that's not a terrible idea. He had an 8.8 RAS and a 4.39 40, but that guy's just a football player,
Well,
and he runs the routes so well that he gets separation all the time.
it's worth mentioning. Normally, guys with his foot frequency, which is what it sounds like, Bears fan, it's one of my favorite traits in a DB and a wide receiver. It is given that you're going to run 10 yards, how many steps did you take in that 10-yard period? Like in the same 2 to 3 seconds of running as somebody else, how many steps did you take? The more that you take, generally the quicker your cuts. And in Lad's case, oh man, hot knife through butter.
Yep.
Like Lad McConkey's cuts are like that first cut when you're going through great, well cooked prime rib, right? Where the you can't believe that the meat is parting in front of the blade because you don't feel like you're putting any effort into it. And normally, guys like him, Nick, can't be emphasized enough. Don't come out well in RAS. Like normally, high foot
Right.
frequency guys aren't that fast
Yeah.
because they don't stride really
You
hard.
do you
Lad
know?
running a 4.39 is bonkers.
Oh yeah. Do you know Mike Renner?
Yes,
So formerly at PFF, do you know who he comped McConkey to?
it's a famous Steeler
Yes,
from way back
yeah,
when.
Antonio Brown, which is the same thing, foot frequency, acceleration, but you have to know where to challenge the defender's leverage while you're starting to route
Mhm.
them and to change speeds and decelerate. And those guys just do a great. So that's just another one. But there's a bunch of receivers, and we have a lot to talk about in this show. So I'm going
But
to rattle through a few.
but I want to hit
Go,
that, man. I want
go
to
ahead.
hit that because it's so easy for us to keep talking about these top 3 receivers because frankly, the Bears have the luxury of being able to do that. Nick, why am I adamant that Roma Dunze is probably going to be there at 9? It is as simple as Keon Coleman, Lad McConkey, Xavier Worthy, Brian Thomas, Adonai Mitchell tested so well that there are going to be teams that are going to say, why would I pick one up now when I can get somebody nearly as good in just a little bit? I mean, there's no Atlanta has to be sitting there thinking, to use a stupid example, or you want to use a much more realistic example? Let's go with the Chargers. Who are the Chargers thinking they're going to miss out on drafting at 40? Or I think it's 37, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Chances are they miss out on plenty of them, but all 8? Come on.
right,
That's
right.
ridiculous. And so
What?
that could get you Joe Alt at pick number 5. And then Tennessee, who desperately needs some offensive line. Well, they may think that they could get themselves a sweet player just a little later in the draft as well. So once you get these teams thinking, well, there's depth in this wide receiver class, I can take one later. That leaves you a top guy at least staying in the top 10. You know what I'm saying?
Well, it's supply and demand, you know? And it's crazy just how and this goes back to high school 7-on-7, et cetera. Like the passing game is just continually increasing. That's why the product of these receivers is just getting better. Like we've talked about the top 8. Like beyond that, there's other guys that I really like. I like Ricky Pearsall a lot. Jalen McMillan
Baller.
got hurt at Washington. I think Jalen McMillan is solid.
He's good.
Jermaine Burton is solid. You talked about Worthy and his 40 time. I mean, there's a lot of receivers I thought that did well. And there's so like I literally we talked about this off air. I was like, what if we move down from 9 and then we get a couple of these guys later? Like I had the
Oh
same
yeah.
thought. So I think
Worthy
other teams have to think that too.
Worthy has me sitting here thinking, for instance, that like, okay, so I have to go back and I have to watch another game of Josh Newton, the corner from from TCU,
Yeah.
because I watched his Texas game and was like, I do not need another game of this guy. He cannot play. He's not draftable. Xavier Worthy is killing him. And I'll tell you right now, if you go watch that game, Nick, you're going to see it. Xavier Worthy probably hangs 180 yards on Josh
Would,
Newton by himself.
would you draft Xavier Worthy for Chicago?
It depends on where. For me, I would argue, Nick, that my goal in draft is to love every single prospect, every one of them, at a certain spot in the draft. If that
Well,
makes sense.
no, I get that, but I mean, if it was
I
the
want a
second
bigger
round, they acquired a second rounder. Would you spend a second on him?
the second. Yeah, I would probably spend a second rounder on him.
I can't do it. He's 165 pounds.
I know, but so is gosh, we just saw Tank do this. But before Tank, it was Devontae Smith. When you're that fast and you can weaponize your speed like that, there are things in the NFL that it opens up that other teams simply do not have the guy to account for. And I don't think that he fits as a wide receiver 1, which works in Chicago, man, because the Bears are one of the only teams that are doing all of this wide receiver related drafting with a stud in house. Like,
Well, but you just said you wanted an X. This guy's not an X.
no, he's not. I would have to find some other solution there, but hopefully that's where Shane can make his money, right? But
I mean, if he's your wide receiver 3, I mean, he's basically like a Tyler Scott type. That's great because you have the
if
speed guy.
I'm trying to think of a decent example here
I mean,
because
he's obviously better. I'm just saying, like in
oh
terms of
yeah,
the archetype of like what because you need the X in Chicago,
the
and then if you get Worthy and he's your 3, that's amazing.
the
You
biggest
know,
problem that we have in this kind of conversation, Nick, is that you ask me yes or no, and the truth is much more like, would you take Worthy or would you take Darius Robinson? It is Darius, right? The
yes,
Missouri
yes,
kid. And at that point, nah, I'd probably take Robinson, right?
yes,
The player that I could get at the spot I would be taking Worthy is probably the better choice, or literally a different wide receiver. Like, for instance, not Keon Coleman, who's a guy I know I bring up all the time as if I've got a sponsorship deal with him, and I don't. But Keon Coleman ends up with a 9.23 RAS where his main blemish is a 4.61 40. And then, as if on cue, Next Gen Stats tracks him as the second fastest receiver in the gauntlet drill, the third fastest receiver throughout the majority of the routes that they ran, to the point where the only real speed blemish he has is the part where he ran the 40,
Yep.
which is hilariously indicative of what I see from Keon too. Right?
Yeah.
Like a good 10-yard split. The burst he has, he obviously jumped well, and you see it on his tape. Short
Mhm.
area. The guy's a nightmare,
Well,
especially for
and
his
he's a
size.
bully with the ball in the air.
How do you not love that? And
Yep.
so, as far as how well will he separate, man, I don't know. I can't tell you I know,
Alshon
but
Jeffrey didn't separate a lot, but he did well.
I think he did okay for himself.
Yeah,
And
he
not to
worked out okay.
mention, I keep going back to like the best part about this. If we were drafting Caleb and we were, which I guess it's an if. I do think the Bears are leaning in that direction, but
Mhm.
we'll get there later. If the Bears were drafting Caleb and they didn't have DJ Moore on the roster, Nick, I'd be like, you have to take one of these wide receivers high. You
Yes.
might have to trade up because just to make sure you get one.
Well,
The only reason I'm calm is because they have a guy in house that just caught for 1,300 yards. But beyond the yards, because the yards are one thing, Nick, we saw DJ Moore play hurt and in those games still produce. We saw DJ Moore do what I think is rare within wide receiver world and win a game by himself. That
Mhm.
Thursday game against Washington was something to
and he should
behold.
have had another touchdown.
He
He
should
got
have
robbed
had
out of another.
another
Should have been 4.
touchdown. Like
Yep.
it is wild seeing how good DJ is, and he should have another 1 to 2 years in his prime. I want the Bears to find a receiver that can grow to basically take the reins from him in
Yeah,
3 years. That's the
yeah.
reality of the NFL. You need to be
The
thinking
Reggie
about this.
Wayne to the Marvin Harrison
You
to
have
yep,
to. You
yep.
have to think about
Now
these.
now, but why I want it, Robert, and it's my main thing all off season is if no matter who's at quarterback, surround him. Like the
Mhm.
few times we've seen it in Chicago, surround him. That's why it's like one would be awesome and getting another receiver at 9, but getting another one later, I think would be cool too. Do you want to still talk receivers? You want to move on?
Well, I do want to bring up something. So, first of all, Troy Franklin did surprise me. You mentioned him earlier. I'm right there with you. You also have Jacob Cowing down here.
Well, do you think Franklin would run faster?
I don't know. Can I be honest with you?
Huh.
Watching Oregon's tape, I expected to see Franklin as a blazer. But the more tape I watched, the more I kept seeing corners hang with him. Where
Hmm.
Franklin will get by you sometimes, but a lot of times it seemed like it was more Franklin would pop the top off of a cover 2 zone that then, or guys playing poach, right? Off of a 3-by-1 alignment. And then there's just tons of space once he
Yeah,
gets past the cover 4 corner.
yeah,
And I'm not by any means trying to take anything away from Franklin, but him ending up testing like he did, a 4.41 is about what we expected. Everything else is also about what we expected
yeah.
because you don't see the suddenness. And if you did, you'd see it more in the way that he can
I
drop
mean,
his hips and break.
he's just 176 pounds, and so in my mind, I'm like, okay, you'll be in the 4.3s easy, and I know that's point zero 0.02 off, y'all. And if you want to think I'm like really, you know,
It matters.
yeah, yeah,
He
harsh
also
on
is,
him, but like, when you have other guys, Rome is only 0.04 away from him, and he's a big-bodied guy that weighs 40 more pounds than him.
and
Like
on top of
that,
that,
that
man,
shouldn't happen.
on top of that, I tend to believe this is my opinion. Feel free to disagree, that there's a point where you say, Troy, I thought you were taller. I thought you were at
Yeah.
least 6'2", maybe
Well,
6'2.5".
that's another thing. So we said 6'2". Rome was 6'2" and like 7/8, so really 6'3". Same thing with like Brian Thomas, but they were both listed, I think 6'4", weren't they?
Right now, I don't actually know. That's a good question.
Brian Thomas was listed 6'4" at
Mhm.
LSU's website. I don't know if Rome was 6'3" or 6'4", but some guys came in shorter. A lot of these guys came in shorter, which is
Which would be
interesting.
normal. And there's
Right.
a moment here where we could talk about Caleb's measurements, but there's a pin
Well,
in that, and we'll get there. Uh,
Robert, but part of this is like I know coaches want to like bump that up. And just a small fun side story, okay?
mhm.
So I'm 6 foot, okay? My senior year for basketball, okay? You get like you fill out what your measurements are, and I was like, "Hey, coach, I'm gonna put 6'2" down. It'd be like fun." And he went down to he was like 5'10". I was like, how do you put me under what I actually am? You know what I mean? So, coach, if you're listening to
See,
this, I love you, man. But it was a funny thing my senior year.
it's
But
just funny
but
talk about Franklin. No, oh
yeah.
no, keep going. Sorry, I just
No, but I'm
realized I
saying
cut
just
off
a
your
lot of
statement.
guys came in smaller,
Mhm.
and like another one, like a Jacob Cohen, the wide receiver for Arizona, got a lot of hype out of Senior Bowl, really quick and stuff. He's 5'8", 168, okay, and he ran a 4.38, but his RAS was only 6.05, which is low for that
Yep.
because one, he's small, but two, his short shuttle, 3-cone, broad jump, like all the explosive stuff that the little guy should be good at, he was not good at.
What I think gets brutal for guys like Troy Franklin is that the fall from 25th on PFF's mock draft simulator to low second round will come overnight. Like there's a
Yes.
point where the moment that you aren't jumping well, Nick, who would you rather take between 2 6'1" receivers, Troy Franklin or Devontae Walker? Well, a weekend like Devontae or like Tez had, you probably take Tez Walker. So then
Yeah.
you look at this and it's like,
He
oh
he
well,
needed that, bro. He
what
needed
other
that.
6'1" receivers do we have? Well, you could take Xavier Legette, who, as
Ricky
much as
Pearsall.
I say that I'm down on Xavier Legette, it's just because plenty of people have him as a draft darling, and I see him as an outstanding athlete that's a little
Yeah.
on the older side, and his
Yep.
technique, I don't want to say it disturbs me, but it's definitely not at the level of the top 8 or 9 receivers. It's really the fact that there's all these other guys that are just so good. I love Pearsall. I hope Pearsall makes some money for himself because he is a heck of a player. I would love to have him in a Bears uniform. The only thing about guys like Pearsall, just to end the wide receiver conversation, if you're down for it, that I want to point out, Nick, is I would like the Bears to have a 1B, whatever that looks like. There are a lot of guys, Ricky Pearsall being a perfect example, who would
Mhm.
be a great wide receiver too, probably in a year from now. like after
Yeah.
he gets a feel for the pro game. I would love it if the Bears had DJ Moore, also a guy that profiles as a future number one, and then whoever they can get in free
Yes.
agency. Be like overdo this for once, because as a Bears fan, I've
Yep.
been settling for an idealized 1-2-3, and then stunning shocker in a violent game, the number one goes down, and suddenly here's probably Caleb Williams playing with Ricky Pearsall and Cole Kmet and Tyler Scott because Curtis Samuel tore his ACL too. And that's not good enough
Mhm.
for me. Maybe I'm
No.
overdoing it. Maybe I'm being crazy.
No, 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 because we talked about this, right? The Bears teams that have been well, I mean, any NFL team that has had a prolific passing game, you can go back to the Rams with the show on turf. Look at the squad they had. The 98 Vikings, they had a squad. Uh Brady, his best years when he had a group, Manning, same thing. Like even the
Yep.
best quarterbacks need the receivers. So pivoting that guys that could also help in that area would be tight ends. So Brock Bowers didn't run, jump, anything, but he measured in 6'3", 243, which is actually pretty close to like Trey McBride, Sam Laporta, Dalton Kincaid, which I know people are like, well, that's not like how big Gronk is. The NFL tight end is evolving, y'all. And
Oh,
we
yeah.
saw Sam Laporta just crush it. So, like to me, I think it's that he's fine with his size. He's not going to be the Y. You know what I mean? That's going to be perfect.
Can I interest you, Nick? This is to me what would be scary about Brock Bowers. Just to use an example, okay? Can I interest you in a 9.49 RAS score where we have a 6'3" tight end? He weighed in at 250. He ran a 4.6 40. He jumped a 40-inch vert and a 10-inch broad jump, both elite at his position.
10 feet broad jump.
10 feet project. Oh, I see it as 1006. Which prospect do you think I'm talking about?
No, 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 no. You said 10-inch broad jump, and I was
Sorry,
just gonna be
you're
like
right.
that.
10 feet. And then I think this is saying that it is a 1006 for when they're riding it. That's a 10 and a half inch or
Yeah.
like
Yep.
10 and a half foot. So 10 and a half foot broad jump. All these numbers are great. There's a point where Brock Bowers is an exceptional tape athlete. Don't let me take anything away from him as if the underwear Olympics somehow makes Brock irrelevant. But when you've got guys like Ben Sinnott that are athletically similar, you start to say, what is, honestly, Nick, this is, I think, the question I want you to answer. What is the difference between Brock Bowers at home and Brock Bowers? And how much value do you think he carries, he being Brock?
Well, okay, first off, Brock Bowers is an athletic freak.
He is.
So those that don't know, like he got found because he crushed a Nike Spark camp out of high school. He had like one offer before then, and then Bama and Georgia, everyone offered him. The difference between them, I so where I'm at now, and I love Brock Bowers, is I would draft one of these other guys later because I want to get more receivers like we talked about. I mean, you could even talk me into Dallas Turner, which we'll get into probably next. You know, what so like one of those freak athletes and then a developmental tight end because you already have Cole Kmet. I know I've talked about how I love the two tight end ideas because I do like it because you don't know if it's run pass. It's really good with matchups. I know Shane Waldron really likes it, but spending that 109 or trade down and again getting Brock Bowers when you could get Adonai Mitchell, Dallas Turner, whomever else, I think I would rather lean away from Brock right now.
That's about how I feel. Now, I do want to just make a quick, I don't know about a correction, but I want to issue a difference. So, what's the difference between Ben Sinnott and Brock Bowers? Well, according to his high school scouting report, this is back from 2020, Brock was running a 4.540 as a sophomore. So, if he has maintained that speed, God forbid he's gotten that thing down, holy smokes, because that is a different level of fast than you're going to see from some of these other guys. But I can't help thinking, Nick, that you and I are on the same page. I want a developmental tight end bad, but
Mhm.
also Noah Fant is a free agent, and I'm by no means trying to connect any dots because I
Colby
don't know anything,
Parkinson.
right? But there's a point where you could also say if you can get that second tight end in free agency, it's not the position that anybody's paying attention to, but
Mhm.
yeah, you'd have what you needed there so that you could address the positions that you're a little bit more heavy on, right?
Yeah. Well, you could go even, I mean, you mentioned Noah Fant, but a couple years ago, Mike Gesicki was a
Hmm.
second round athletic freak tight end. You could sign him for like probably 2 million. I
Right
mean,
there.
something super cheap.
Jared Wiley had himself a hell of a weekend.
Yep.
What is this? Theo Johnson. I know the Senior Bowl guys,
Oh
so
my gosh, Theo Johnson,
yeah,
man.
he looks nuts. And I need to watch more of his tape, but this is not the same problem that Zach Kuntz had, where Zach Kuntz was a wide receiver playing tight end that did
Yeah.
not want to block. And it was very obvious that the whole league thought the same thing. Really, the only guy that I thought, and you wrote this down, this is a Nick note that I am reading. Actually, you know what, Nick? I'll let you take credit for it. Nick, was there any tight end that disappointed you this
Well,
weekend?
first off, Theo Johnson just needs a line in this pod. Theo Johnson had a perfect 10 at Raz. He's 6'6", 259. He ran a 4.58 at 6'6", 259. Okay,
Insane.
which is faster than Keon Coleman. Okay, which we're not hating on. That's just the 40 he ran. 39.5 vertical and a 10.5 broad jump. What? Like, are you an
Freak.
alien?
Freak.
Insane. Anyways, yeah, the one I thought that would test a little better was Jatavian Sanders out of Texas. I mean, a good prospect. You watch film, he's fun, moves tight end. He's a little smaller, kind of in that Brock Bowers range. But I just thought he would test a little better than he did.
I worry about Sanders the more info we're getting on these receivers because it is beginning to look like an offense that, first of all, Quinn Ewers, how were we not just balling? Like,
Right?
turns
That's what
out
I thought.
Turns out we're working with everything Washington had plus a little bit more. And we know Quinn Ewers' tools are nasty. This is not a Quinn Ewers podcast. We're going to move on from that. The point is that you had two field stretchers that were stretching the defense for all the defense could stretch. So I'm not surprised Jatavion took advantage of an awful lot of space.
Yeah.
It's just, will it be so easy in the
Is,
NFL? I mean,
was that secretly a Jonathan Brooks anti
oh, I,
statement
I
there
don't
because
think
they
so.
they stretched the field so much that he had light boxes and easy lanes to run in?
Well, I mean, it's still the Big 12 and it's still Texas. So teams are still going to commit an
That's
extra run
true.
defender because the moment that you let Texas's 3, 4, and 5, I guess 4 and 5 star offensive line run you over in the Big 12 is the moment that you get 50 hung on you and everybody's embarrassed.
All right,
But
all right, hold on. Let's pivot, okay? People
we
want
do.
to hear about the
We
things the
have to.
Bears are going to go after.
I know.
D ends.
No
D end.
way. That's the pivot?
Yeah, D end.
We have to talk about Caleb.
We
This
will,
is
but D end is big.
this
D
is
end
the
we can go
pin.
through.
This is the pin, and we'll let everybody palate cleanse with the DNs after it.
Get mad at me. I was pumped about D ends.
We went skill position to skill position. Let's talk about the skill position, and then let's
Really?
pack it up.
Really?
Okay, do you want to put your DN? Do you want to go DNs first?
This will give me 2 minutes to talk D ends.
Go.
All right, y'all. So DNs, I thought had a good showing for the ones that I think that Chicago's looking at. Um, the thing that surprised me, so Jared Verse, Florida State, 6'3", he weighed in 254. So to me, he lost some weight to come in at a 9.52 RAS. And one of the things that you look for at the end is your arm length. Okay. So he had 33.5-inch arms, which that's okay. It's not great, but I thought it'd be a little bit better. And his wingspan is 79.5. Okay. Leautu Latu, 6'4" and 6'8". So he's taller, 259, weight in heavier, 62 or 32-inch arms. I thought, again, that's a little shorter. I knew his measurements weren't going to be perfect. He had a 919 RAS, which honestly, Robert, that
Good
surprised
weekend for
me.
him.
Yeah, I didn't think he was going to get there. 4.6, 440. I mean, he's not the athlete the other guys are. He's more of the technician pass rusher. And just the cream of it to me is Dallas Turner. So 6'2" and 6'8", so almost 6'3", 247, which I mean, he had to bulk up to that. He was light coming in at Bama. 34.38-inch arms. Like he's got
Freak.
long arms and an 83-inch wingspan.
I
So
think he
like,
I think he just outreaches Olu. Just to
oh,
use an example of what that looks like.
crazy. 4.4, 640, 949 RAS, 40.5-inch vertical. Like that's an athlete. And then if we compare it to the other guy that people are pumped about, athlete, the end, would be Chop Robinson. Almost 6'3, 254. So similar to other guys. 969 RAS, 32.5 inch arms. He has the shortest arm length, and his wingspan is 76. Dallas Turner has almost 7 full inches in wingspan than Chop Robinson. And Chop struggles against the run. And we always knew he's a great athlete. He's kind of more athlete out there than anything else. And so, to me, in terms of these DNs, excuse me, I think Verse and Turner kind of catapult themselves up as the top two if they weren't already there. And Dallas Turner, I think, got himself in the top 9 conversation.
He has to be. I mean, this is defensive end. We've done so much dunking on these DEs because we just got away from Will Anderson being in the conversation that we're forgetting that this is actually a pretty good edge class. I mean, in the wide, there's so many people, just because I've read it a lot, Nick, that have said this is a bad edge class. This is a fine edge class.
No.
And that's a position that you're looking for dudes at. So
Yep.
it won't surprise me to see whether it's Turner. I could see Latu making a late push. I really could if somebody just loved his tape, but I doubt it the more I'm talking about it.
Yeah, I'm the
It's going to
medicals
be
too.
Verse or it's going to be Turner by
Yep.
all stretch of the imagination. Chop could also pop just because he's so athletic, but he's one dimensional. So I'm right there
He
with
is.
all of it. I think you covered all the ones that matter. We could
Do,
talk about guys in the second round, but there's another podcast for that.
do, you, do, you, do you think people even want to talk about quarterbacks here, Robert?
Yes, of course they do. Of course they do. And it's such a funny conversation because if you ask me, Nick, I thought Caleb Williams had a great weekend, all
Yeah.
things considered.
Yeah.
This was the moment that a lot of people that were detractors of Caleb Williams have been rubbing their hands together, waiting to see that 6'1" turn into 5'9", right? I mean, the way that you saw people talk about it, he was Bryce Young. We've even seen people mention on Twitter that stuff was anything from photoshopped to don't get out angled. Caleb is obviously shorter than blank, and Caleb ends up coming in at 6'1" and an eighth. 214 pounds and hand size of 9.75 inches. I'm well aware he didn't do medicals. Let's get into that later. But just looking at the measurements, if you were waiting for the red flag, you didn't get one. And I would argue that that's the best case scenario for Caleb Williams.
Yeah, I mean, well, here's the crazy thing is I thought I didn't think he was going to go in under 6 foot at all. I mean, maybe 6 foot and change,
Six and
Bino,
a half would, or 6 foot and a half would have made a lot of sense.
yeah, yeah, but being Bino just over 6'1", I mean, it's not ideal. I'm not going to sit here and say it is. I mean, I would love to have 6'3", 6'4" quarterback, and because it helps with looking over the line, y'all. Like that's just being honest. But I really thought his hand size was going to be small because he has all those fumbles, and I was like, so in my mind, I was like, okay, is it hand size? Is that the reason why? That's not why. I mean, his hand size is bigger than, I mean, check this one. So Drake May, 6'4" and 3/8, bigger than 6'4", 223, big boy, 9 1/8 inch hands. He has smaller hands than Caleb.
Mhm.
JJ McCarthy, bigger than Caleb Williams size wise, smaller hands. Justin Fields has 9 1/8. Caleb has 9 3/4. So he has bigger hands. I think in the percentiles, I think he's in like the 60, 70th percentile for hand size.
He's
So
above average.
yeah, so in terms of the hand size or the fumbles, it's kind of what we thought. He just holds on to the ball too long and gets hit.
It's
So he'll learn from that. It's not the hand size, which honestly I think is good news, as you said. And you had
right.
talked about a little bit about the everything this weekend. I thought his interviews that I saw with lots of people. I mean, not just the press conference, but having all the individuals, even the one that's like build your perfect quarterback, and Caleb went through and how he would do that. I was like, yep, that's about how I would build my perfect quarterback. Like I want the leadership of Tom Brady and I want the arm of Aaron Rodgers. And now, I mean, I thought he improved in my book. I know some people it came off as he's cocky. They didn't like that how he talked to that he wanted to be the number one pick. But to me, like if that's his path all along and he said he wants to win, I'm okay with it.
I mean, we are in such a funny conversation when we bring all this stuff up because not only is it largely based on personal preference, but I also tend to think, Nick, that this is where we get to like, okay, how many football players do you know? How many locker rooms have you been around? I've been
Yeah.
around nearly any. I've just asked questions about quite a few and learned a lot more insight than I thought I was going to get in my time. You've actually coached in some of these. The fact that Caleb Williams in that stupid little fastest 40 short that you can find on YouTube got two questions, one early, but one in the middle of something you're trying to answer as fast as possible. And it was about goals and it was about what do you want to bring to your football team, etc. And his answer for both was Super Bowls, not MVP, not winning games, not something specific like a passing title. The guy immediately clicked out Super Bowls. Maybe there's some PR flashcards to it. I'm sure there's plenty of that. But Caleb seems in earnest a guy committed to winning and
Mhm.
not Caleb Williams seems like he is more interested in winning than he is in making friends. And I don't have an issue with that. I'm sure and I'm not surprised that there are plenty who would rather their quarterback come across like somebody that they could go get a beer with, right? They
Mhm.
want that quarterback to be somebody that they would hire, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
But Caleb seemed to me like somebody that can raise the level of the Chicago Bears. And you and I were talking about this pre show. The Caleb Williams that I heard interviewing Nick seems like the kind of guy where if he's going to be a problem in your locker room simply isn't good enough because the locker room that or not the Caleb Williams that I am seeing, sorry for tripping over my words there, seems like he is going to demand the best out of everybody around him. And if your coaches aren't delivering practice schedules the way that they should, if your wide receivers coach or your quarterback coach isn't performing the way that they should, Caleb's going to have an opinion about it. But my guess is, and hey, it's just a guess, that that kind of extra push may ultimately help the room more than it hurts it, even if there is going to be trade off involved. I'm sure we're going to hear about Caleb's selfishness creating some minor hiccups in the locker room. But Aaron Rodgers, who we know is a little bit of a loon when he wants to be,
Yeah.
the Packers ended up loving him because
Yeah.
when you
Well,
win games, people get over it.
well, there were also a lot of interviews with USC teammates, and he was asking questions of Brendan Rice, and the crowd was kind of fun.
I thought it
Like
was funny.
none of his teammates have said anything bad about him either, you know. And I think that sometimes where it's, paralysis by analysis here of looking at everything you talked about, the pictures of Caleb, like we want to look at every like little thing, like we're gonna find. Did they? You talked. Did they go to his birthday party? Did they not go to his birthday? Like to me, everything is checked out, and he's good. I mean, think of this: you're 21, 22. You go to the combine. You're likely the number one pick. Everyone wants to talk to you. That had to be a trip. Like that has to be like really cool, you know? But
And
still, it wasn't like overly cocky, which is where I think where some people are at with it. I just thought it was confident, which is where he's at with how he won the Heisman. He's
there's a
really good.
there's a story I remember from years ago, right? Where Eli Manning was asked while he was still playing. And this was around the same time that Eli had come off of a season where he had led the league in interceptions, right?
Oh,
And
so NFL Eli.
NFL Eli.
Okay.
And they asked Eli Manning, "Are you as good as Aaron Rodgers?" And he took offense to the question. Said, "Yeah, what? I'm better than Aaron Rodgers. I'm the best quarterback in the NFL. What are you talking about?" I got mad at the reporter because I think it's easy to forget, Nick, the idea that Caleb Williams would unflinchingly think he's going number one is the only attitude anybody should have. Drake May should have that attitude. Marvin Harrison should have that attitude.
Yeah.
These guys aren't being drafted to be logical and to be rational. They're drafted to be the best, right? And so there are pieces of all this that I saw people online calling Caleb entitled. I saw people online calling him arrogant. There's nothing to me that's wrong with confidence. And then we get to the medicals thing. And here's my take,
Well,
Nick.
hold on. Can we talk about that real quick?
Yes,
If there's any position, y'all, that you want a player on your team to be confident in their abilities, it's quarterback.
goodness gracious, yes.
Next would probably be corner because corners are going to get burnt. You have to have confidence. You're like think of Tyreek Stevenson. That's probably next best. Like think there's always going to be interceptions. There's always going to be things that don't go your way. There's going to be fumbles and sacks, and you're going to lose games. Like that's going to happen to every quarterback. They have to believe themselves to come up. Think of a guy that didn't have any confidence. They wouldn't make it as quarterback.
Oh my gosh, Nick, to use a very tangible example, the Tyson Bagent we saw against Carolina could not stay the starter. I understand he won the game, but when Tyson Bagent threw a couple of interceptions and became gun shy and shelled up, you hit a point where now we were late to a lot of windows we weren't late to when we first started playing against the Raiders. The ball placement became just as wobbly as it ever was. We were holding on to the ball more than we should be. We
Yep.
could make jokes about how Tyson Bagent was slowly becoming Justin Fields, I guess. Like, there's definitely concerns there
What?
about,
But
okay,
preseason him was much more confident too.
right.
Think
It
about preseason where he was at.
it's to point out, Nick, that against the Saints, perfect example of what it is to be an NFL quarterback. There are going to be times where you're going to throw an interception, and then your defense is going to make a stand, and then you're going to get the ball again, and you could still win this game if
Yep.
you can get that interception out of sight and of mind. And
Yep.
that kind of mental resilience, especially in an NFL where sometimes all you got to do is score 3 touchdowns and a field goal to win a football game,
Yeah.
you have to have it. You have
Yep.
to have it because Jesse Bates is going to pick you off eventually, right? Somebody who's paid a lot of money is going to make a play that they're paid a lot of money to make. And you have to shrug it off in an 11-man game and lead that unit the
Yep.
next drive. You don't have time to get focused or on the mistakes that you made. And that kind
Mm.
of confidence, you need it.
No. So in terms of medicals, okay, and I'm going to take the reins on this one because I pointed this out to you off air. So Caleb Williams did not do the medical portion at the combine. He's going to do that during his visits with the people that are likely to draft him. So the early picks. Okay, I know some people were upset about that. I I didn't really mind it because it kind of made sense to me. It's like, well, the people that need to know the medical will. I mean, you still can't like hide anything if that was the concern. And I know some people got a little entitlement out of that, but I brought it up to you, Robert, where some people didn't know that Trevor Lawrence didn't do medicals at the combine either. And instead, let me look here on the tweet from Ian Rappaport. He's getting married to his longtime girlfriend that weekend, and he's still recovering from a shoulder. But even the people that are recovering from things, they still get checked at the combine. So it was an issue for Trevor Lawrence, and even getting married. Robert, I'm getting married, and I made sure it wasn't on NFL draft weekend, and
It's
I'm
not
just a
that
contender in
hard.
that. So to me, like we didn't make it a big deal back then, so I'm not sure why we're making a big deal right now.
Oh, I completely agree. Not to mention, Nick, I was going to go a completely different direction with this, talking about how Caleb Williams, a younger player, I mean, he brought up Michael Jordan in the ESPN article that he recently reported in. He obviously knows a thing or two about basketball, and when you look at what the NBA is doing with the overwhelming majority of anybody projected to go in the top 10, I don't know if you know this, Nick, they had a major problem with this happening where teams would or where players would basically selectively give out medical information so that they could try to basically get to where they wanted to be. Where if a player didn't want to go top 1, top 2, he would simply do everything that he could to not give his medical information to the teams drafting number 1
Wow,
and
I didn't
number
know that.
2. The NBA's CBA just recently got renegotiated. In that CBA, if you are projected to go in the top 10, only the top 10 get your medicals. And now
Hmm.
it's a requirement that the top 10 all get them so that you avoid agents doing exactly this. But it's more to say, Nick, Caleb seems to be striking a balance between the two. Now, if we find out down the road that Caleb is refusing to give his medicals to Chicago, I am going to change my stance here. That is a major problem. But
Right.
so long as Chicago gets the medical, then Caleb is following an NBA precedent that is incredibly normal and is happening in another major sports league.
Well, let's think about Chicago's starting quarterback right now. What do we find out at the combine this time from Justin Fields?
That he was epileptic.
Right, we found out. What did we find out last year about CJ Stroud?
Well, I'm thinking about the S2 test. What are you
Well,
thinking
that's
about?
what I'm saying though. But that got leaked. Things get leaked, and like,
Because
why allow any opportunity for
as
anything?
it turns out, Nick, in a shocking turn of events, the Cleveland Browns have no allegiance to the Chicago Bears. And if they find the tiniest little pre tear in Caleb's knee, they can absolutely leak that to try to see if maybe, just maybe, Caleb will fall to around number 6, where they think that they could trade future assets to go up and take him. I mean, this is a competitive game, and people look for their edge wherever they can. And I will put it this way, Bears fan: why would you want the Green Bay Packers, the Detroit Lions, because Minnesota will probably meet with him and probably get his medical, but the Minnesota Vikings, the Detroit Lions, well, the Green Bay Packers, the Detroit Lions, why do you want them knowing everything about Caleb Williams? Why does this help us? I
Mhm.
think of it as something that could become a Bears competitive advantage, silly as that is.
Well, the other thing I thought of, and I can't remember the player, Robert, but a few years ago, there's a player that had a a knee, I think, that they were recovering from. They went to the combine, and 32 doctors probed and probbed on the knee, and he tweaked his knee
That's
because
the
of it.
other thing we need to make sure to remind everybody. The NFL doesn't do the medical like you're thinking they do. Like, it's not a standardized medical done by all 32 teams at once. When you hear all 32 teams at once, that is 32 consecutive meetings. It is like going through 32 physicals all at the same time. And unsurprisingly, it is apparently a huge chore.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not efficient. So, to me, it wasn't a big the interesting thing that didn't get as much play was Jaden Daniels, Malik Neighbors, and Malachi Corley not doing even the measurements or anything at the combine. I thought that was odd.
I think it is odd. And it was funny to me, the disparity in the coverage between the two. Not that I care, to be honest with you. I mean, we can point it out without making a meal out of it, right, Nick? Where we can say Jaden Daniels, I think, is making the smart move for everything he is. Right now, Jaden Daniels is getting talk in the number 2 and number 1 overall slots. Don't let anybody know anything. Like, goodness gracious, give nobody anything to walk or to hang on to. Jaden Daniels comes out in the media and says, "Well, I want to throw out my pro day so that I can feature my teammates." Sure. Yeah, you want to throw out your pro day because you'll be throwing to Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas the
Yeah.
same way that you've been throwing on the practice field. Yeah, we get it, don't we? You don't want Xavier Leggett screwing you up. You don't want any drop, any flag in chemistry between you and
Mhm.
Devontae Walker affecting your draft stock, especially when right now, Nick, your draft stock is meteoric. Like, I'm not surprised at the decisions that Daniels is making, but he's being so cagey, and Caleb is being what I would consider a pretty normal future first overall pick. It is funny seeing the way different people are talking about them because you can feel that Heisman halo over Jaden Daniels' head.
Well, if I was, I don't know, actually, if I was Jaden Daniels, I would have ran at the combine because you're so fast that could have hyped you a little bit until your pro day.
What if you aren't
So
that fast?
I think he's that fast.
I think so too, and now you still think it.
That's true. That's true.
Like,
That's valid.
now you are saying he should have run because he would have done this
Yeah.
or whatever it is. Like, Anthony Richardson went to the combine and tested for a reason. I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
he's stupid fast.
Yeah.
And it
Yeah. He's
looks
a
like,
dude.
at least to me, it looks like JJ McCarthy was going to weigh at the combine so that he can run on his pro day.
you,
Wonder
you
what
know
he's
he's losing weight.
well,
You
I was
know
gonna
he's
say,
losing weight.
wonder what he's gonna do in the middle.
It's the Bryce Young. He's gonna drop like 5 pounds in the toilet or something. All right.
And he'll get a
So
friendly stopwatch. Like, he'll probably end up running a 4.49. Wow.
yeah. So the last thing I thought we could cover is you're hearing rumors from all over the place about Justin Fields' trade market. And there's there's 4 teams that are interested. There's no one that's interested. It's a low market. I mean, it goes back and forth. And again, I'm biased, right? Because I've seen him play. I think that he can play. I think there's still potential there. I'm honestly a little shocked at the rest of the NFL, like at least the Twitter fan bases, whatever, of how like critical they are of Justin. I'm like, man, like you really want to roll with like Daniel Jones instead of getting Justin, or what are the Raiders going to do if they don't? To me, there's 4 quarterbacks. I mean, I guess they could go and get Michael Penix Jr., which, by the way, y'all, Michael Penix Jr. Did you see his measurements, Robert?
He has massive hands. Is that what we're talking about specifically?
Oh, okay. Matt, his hands are 10 and a half. Okay. We talked about how Caleb's were good at 9 and 3/4. He's 10 and a half. He also has 33 and 5/8 inch long arms, and his
Unironically,
wingspan is 81 inches.
unironic, probably not a good thing. You know what
I
I'm
mean,
saying?
it's just like huge arms. I don't know. Yeah,
It's so funny, right? Because there is a part to all these measurements where bigger is not always better. For instance, I don't know what you think. Joe Alt measuring in at 6'8" to me is too tall. We're seeing Braxton Jones struggle with the same problem where you get so tall that you can't drop your hips because you have to drop them an extra foot.
it's
Like
6'8" and a half,
not
Robert.
foot, but yeah, exactly. Like an extra inch is what I was going for. But Bears fan, you probably get it. Point being, Nick, that when Michael Penix has arms that long, I mean, the whole arm has to get through the throwing motion. No surprise it takes a while, right?
Yeah,
I don't know what you thought. I thought Bo Nix looked relatively unspectacular out
yeah,
there. I mean, honestly, I thought that the throwers looked not great, which
yeah.
makes you understand why a lot of these
Right,
guys simply didn't do it because
right.
it's a tough environment for quarterbacks to look
Well,
really good.
but with that, okay, so they didn't look great. So what's Minnesota, Denver, the Raiders, what are they gonna do? Are the
Probably.
Giants sticking with Daniels? I mean, you can go through the list. What and to me, I go through and I'm like, okay, Kirk Cousins is out there. Sure, that's one guy.
Hmm.
If Baker doesn't go back to Tampa, go somewhere else, well, then Tampa has an opening. But like, I don't know. Someone said, well, Joe Flacco and Ryan Tannehill and Jimmy Garoppolo are out there. I'm like, you want them over Justin Fields? And they said, yeah. To me, I'm just a little shocked by it.
It is just my opinion, Nick, but I can't help but think that there are two pieces of Justin Fields' game that are making this hard for everybody involved. Hey, who knows? Maybe the trade news drops the same day that this episode drops, so tomorrow, right? And all of this ends up being irrelevant. I don't know, but it sure feels as if you've got NFL executives that talk to the media that are saying, I don't even know if Justin Fields is going to fetch a third. And then you have Rappaport, what, Pelissero and Schefter all consistently saying maybe a first, at least a second. And the truth has to be somewhere in the middle. But
Yeah.
where in the middle is it, right? The hardest things for Justin Fields' value are that number one, if you trade anything of value, so that's at least a second round pick, and then your team performs at all, David Mulugeta is going to get his chunk of flesh from you in the form of an extension, almost assuredly. Like, Justin Fields is not coming to your team to be a contract oriented team player. He's going to be the best leader possible. But if you trade significant draft capital, you give him and his team more leverage to go get a contract extension. And that's okay. That's what the players should be doing. It's just something that I know I would be thinking of as a GM. And also, Nick, I love Justin Fields as a person. Justin Fields, the athlete, is a superhero. It
Yep.
has to be gnawing in the back of everybody, your, my, and NFL GM's mind that if Kirk Cousins tears his Achilles, for crying out loud, his career is not just not over. He is going to have legitimate demand in a free agency market. If Justin Fields suffers a major lower body injury, he has not developed enough as a passer where we still want him for the future. And you don't have to commit to that. You don't have to commit to
Well,
that now. And that's a major part of this point.
here's where I disagree with you, Robert. I think that you're thinking long term. The NFL is a very fast league. Things change quickly. It's about winning.
Mm-hmm.
Like, are the Raiders going to win more with Aiden O'Connell next year or Justin Fields?
Justin Fields.
You
But you
know,
can
or, I mean,
also,
you can
but
go through the list.
if you grab a rookie quarterback, not that this always works, it didn't work in the case of Ryan Pace and Matt Nagy for something very close to home. It sure does seem, Nick, like you can draft yourself a Bo Nix and convince your owner that, oh, he's just a rookie. We didn't think we were going to win with a rookie. What do you think is going on here? And kind of just wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Hey guys, how are we
Right,
gonna figure this out? And
right.
basically buy yourself a free year. But that doesn't always work for everybody. I do think the Giants are a sneaky, interesting one to talk about. Everybody wants to talk about the Steelers. Too many people keep talking about the Falcons. Am I allowed to say that? Am I allowed to speculate
I
that
mean, well, here, where's JJ McCarthy going in this draft?
I think the Falcons pick is not out of the question at the very least?
I think he's going top 6.
Man, if you told me that he was going to go to the Giants, I think that there are some Giants fans I know that would just about flip their lid because you could argue that honest question here, Nick. I like JJ McCarthy. I do. I think he's raw. Needs some time. What are the actual physical differences between him and Daniel Jones?
Oh, he's much better quarterback.
In what sense?
Accuracy, anticipation. I think he has a better arm. I think he moves better in the pocket. I like JJ McCarthy a lot.
I
JJ
do too.
McCarthy is my QB3.
But I'm more talking about how Daniel Jones is also a really good athlete that can hit strikes over the middle of the field and also struggles to throw to the sidelines.
I
I
don't
mean,
do that. I think McCarthy has a better arm.
I think he
McCarthy
has
struggles with accuracy throwing left, which Bears fans are going to know about that one a
been
little bit
there.
with Trubisky.
It's a
But
hard thing to do. Everybody, I actually saw a physicist talk about this at one point, talk about the biomechanics of how hard it is to make sure your foot doesn't swing wide open when you're setting your front foot to throw to the left because your body naturally wants to open your hips too far, is what he was talking about. And it's easy to say things like point your throw in the direction of your throw, but when Nick, as you know, you're shifting from the right hand side all the way over to the left, it is really easy to overset that foot and then end up having to throw with way too much arm out to that left
well,
hand side.
well, the other thing that makes it hard too is, I mean, especially in a drop back game, and people on video here, I have a shoulder pad right here, and so I can't look fully that way. I have to lift up my chin, right, to even see. That's why the shotgun's easier. I can open up more, but that is an issue too in terms of throwing left. So yeah, there's some things with it, but okay, I have him there, right? So even if you
That could be
go
fun.
quarterback, I have him top 6. I think he'll go in top 6. But if quarterbacks go top 3 picks, okay, let's just say those 3 spots, they need quarterbacks, right?
Yes.
There's McCarthy, Nix, Penix, um, Cousins, Baker, right? I mean, that's what 6? But that's it. That's if you count those other guys. Like
Yep.
I'm confident with McCarthy. Oh, sorry, Russ Wilson, Cousins, Baker. That's 4. And you got Giants. Are they going to roll DJ again? Maybe. Denver, Raiders.
Who's going to sign Jake Browning to the big deal? Who's I wonder if
But you know
anybody's
what I
going to.
mean? Like, I just think there's going to be an opening in market for Justin Fields.
There should be. The other X factor here is that Ryan Poles and Matt Eberflus both openly said that they wanted to quote do right end quote by Justin Fields, and that reads to me like trading him as soon as is realistic. And to your point, Nick, I would argue that the way you optimize Justin Fields' value is by holding on to him uncomfortably long so
I
that one
think
of
so
these
too.
teams finds out they are the loser and then they are stuck bargaining with you and
Yep.
then you bargain with them. Well, you don't bargain with them. You shake them down,
Yeah, because
right?
because they'll be desperate.
And you ultimately get what you want. The question that I let me throw this at you, Nick. If you were Ryan Poles, are you willing to string Justin Fields and or your locker room out the necessary amount it takes to get the capital you think you can get, or would you take the best offer you can get on March 12th and call it an off season?
I would string it along for multiple reasons. I know a lot of times people think like the locker rooms are so fragile. Remember the 49ers? Is it Brock Purdy? Is it going to be Trey Lance last offseason? Is it going to be Sam Darnold? All of this, right, going on
And I thought you were about to talk about Alex Smith and Colin
through
Kaepernick.
through
Like,
through through the preseason. That was just last year. They went to the Super Bowl. They actually just dealt with what Debo Samuel. I will not play in San Francisco ever again. All that stuff going on. He's back. He's good. They're all happy. Like there's a lot of stuff I think that we deal with. They know it's a business. And to me, Ryan Poles is focused on winning. The best path to win is to get the best package possible for Justin Fields. And I think that I ultimately agree. I think holding Fields at least through free agency will net more draft capital back to Chicago and maybe into the NFL draft where it's through day one. And then one of the teams didn't get one, like, oh crap, okay, here's a second because we're not gonna get who we thought we were gonna get.
I think it's going to be funny, whatever happens, because if the Bears don't trade Justin Fields in the next 10 or so days, you're going to get a ton of people writing articles about how, see, the Bears are sticking with Justin after all. This is what I told you would happen, even if they're just waiting for the shoe to drop. I truly, Nick, don't know what's going to happen. I think Poles is more serious about getting this deal done early than meets the eye. Because I haven't heard a GM come out and say we're planning to do right by a player, being very obvious about the implication that we're talking about trading the
The
guy.
trading, yeah. Yep.
Right? Like
I agree.
that's weird to me. This whole
But
thing is
but
weird
but
to
they
me.
but they were open. I mean, again, I am not saying I am not open to the crazy Godfather offer and moving off of the 101. I'm still open to that too. Because to me, the Godfather offer is like, okay, 4 ones. Like you get like you you give me everything. I can make any NFL team work. And I feel like that group could if you give them the craziest offer ever.
There's a to me, the more I sit and dwell in it, and look, Nick, maybe this is a product of being a content creator that is staring down the barrel of probable quarterback change. At this point, I'm at that same stage where going back to Justin Fields just feels to me like the least likely option. I mean, I don't
Oh, I agree.
know.
I agree.
But I'm actually saying like let's broaden the scope here a little bit. Like not that the Bears would ever be in on Baker Mayfield, right? But you start to get to the point where if you got the Godfather offer, well, can you talk Seattle into giving you a similar Godfather offer, but they throw you Geno Smith? Not that you would get the Godfather offer from trying to think of another decent example here. Los Angeles, but maybe you could get Matthew Stafford from Los Angeles and send them 101 plus a whole bunch of picks in the future. You start to look and get creative, right? Where why can this Godfather offer not include a quarterback? Would you if you could get Gardner Minshew on a $12 million like per year 2-year deal versus having to deal with Justin Fields' agent? Is that in the back of your mind? Do you actually want to entertain the possibility, Nick, that Justin Fields would make the playoffs and you have to pay him $280 million a year and set all that money aside? Right? Like,
Mm.
I don't know. I don't know. If you ask
I mean, to me, the most likely right now is
Caleb
Caleb
or two,
trade trade down to 2 somehow. That like Washington sends you like some crazy good offer. They take May there. To me, May is my number 2 rather easily.
I, rather
And
easily. It's
and
what
then
makes me think so much of this draft prospect or draft process has to be smoke right now.
I feel like it is. And then I mean that's at least where I'm at. And then third would be Godfather offer crazy, and you stick with Fields because you have like we talked about literally gold coins everywhere. It's just like crazy the amount of team that's around him.
Absolutely. But either way, it was an awesome combine. And we're probably only going to see more fallout from it as we go. Nick,
Dude, Robert, quick.
yeah.
I'm excited about the Bears, man. Whatever they decide, they're
Yes.
gonna be dude, we are getting better, man.
Yeah, we're getting way better. Like, we're
Way better.
turning this conversation into a funeral dirge. This is just getting started. This is threatening to be the most exciting Bears era that I've seen in my life, regardless of what they do. And now it's a matter of what flavor are we getting? I'm trying to think of like Italian food and barbecue. Can you think of things that are more diametrically opposed? It doesn't
Well,
matter.
well, I mean, you just look through like I had someone that talked about like the Bears O line is like as a negative, and I'm like, well, that's if Nate Davis has his worst NFL season again, which I don't think he will. You go through like Darnell's probably going to get better from his rookie year. They're going to have a different center. I'm like, they could be top half in the NFL. Like you just go through. It's like if you get a receiver at 9, you sign some guys the other edge to go with Walker. You're like, dude, we could get a squad. Like not 2025. Like next year we could be good.
I still wish that every single team would stop comparing themselves to the best offensive line that they can remember
Oh my
because
god.
usually that offensive line is not as good as you remember them. My favorite example of this same thing, Nick. So the Detroit Lions offensive line is categorically better than the Chicago Bears offensive line. Not that it looked like that in either of the games where the Bears squared up against the Lions, as the Bears offensive line actually did not have much trouble with Detroit's D line at all, whereas Montez Sweat and Andrew Billings and TJ Edwards in particular ate against a Detroit
Yep.
offensive line that simply could not figure them out. To me, there is nothing scarier, I'm just going to say this, Nick, than the Bears over investing in offensive line, which I do think is a thing, because I believe that eventually every wide receiver or every offensive line is going to they're going to have bad days.
Yeah.
Eventually, they're going to have bad days.
Yep.
So, how many less bad days are you really getting through drafting a rookie left tackle? Now you got to deal with the rookie growing pains that comes with like Joe Alt versus year three Braxton Jones. But also, what are we going to do? Put a rookie center there? Like, there is a point, Nick, where I think Bears fans are saying, well, we have to have Nate Davis be accountable. I would like him to be accountable too, to a
Mhm.
fourth round guard, fifth round guard, or something like that, where if that kid ends up having a great camp and Nate loses his job, okay, that's a good thing. But it's harder to upgrade offensive line than meets the eye, especially when the opportunity cost of doing so is as heavy as it is. But that's just what I think.
No, I agree. So would you be open to Jackson Power Johnson or no?
100%.
Well, he's a rookie.
I know. I'd be open
Uh,
to him, but I've talked about it before. I would take JPJ. I would still have a veteran center, and I would have JPJ as my IOL 6, or like my basically the first reserve. And he would step in at both guard and center, first guy who gets hurt or beat Nate Davis out in camp. To
dude, he's funny.
I know. And he can definitely play guard. The fact that he
Oh
plays
yeah,
center right now does not preclude the fact that he's strong as a bull. But
yeah, yeah.
Nick, you and I could talk for the rest of the evening if somebody allowed us to.
That's
Eventually, we're
true.
going to wrap this thing up. What's going on in the football guys world?
Uh Nothing right now, actually, man. I mean, I got some personal football stuff going on, so
Ooh.
if things happen, I'll let you all know. But I got that going on, so I'm prepping for some things there. So that'll be my teaser. But other than that, man, I'm just enjoying the nice weather, man. I mean, like taking the dogs to the dog park, like doing yard work, like it's weird in Wisconsin. I mean, I'm doing all that and wedding planning, so that's kind of my life right now.
It's beautiful outside right now. Hopefully, it's as beautiful in Chicago as it is. It sounds like Madison and definitely in Dallas. But yeah, everybody, you have a wonderful evening. Plenty more content coming at you on DBB this whole weekend. Probably walk through AD Mitchell as well as a couple others on stream this Tuesday. And until next time, Bears fans, bear down. Thanks so much for bearing with us.